Hi, my name's Tom Kim. I'm a program officer with the Noyce program at NSF. And it is my privilege and honor to basically transition us to the next session. But before we actually get to our plenary speaker, I'd like to introduce my colleague in the Division of Undergraduate Education, Talitha Washington. And she's going to speak to you briefly about a new initiative at NSF called Accelerating Discovery. And so, Talitha, the floor is yours.
I hope everybody had a fantastic meal or still having it. And that creme brulee is awesome, right? Yeah. So just a couple of activities at the National Science Foundation that may be of interest to you. One just came out this year. It's called Accelerating Discovery, educating the future STEM workforce. So the idea of, accelerate the discovery, and then how can we best educate our students so that they can contribute and be a part of the STEM workforce, because as we know, it's dynamically changing. And how does the dynamics of the STEM industry, how could that inform how we prepare our students? So the projects that we're interested in are ones who use innovative uses of technology, as well as big data to understand learning, educational approaches that prepare tomorrow's innovators to use technology and big data to understand the natural world, effects of advances of intelligence agents on STEM teaching and learning, as well as evaluation of disruptive educational interventions on long-term student outcomes. So the proposal window is open between April 2nd of this year and through January 16th. So note that's a time interval. There's not a specific deadline. It's a time interval you can submit at any time. This might be a little bit different from what you're used to seeing in a solicitation, because this is what we call this is a program description. So you won't see the familiar things like what the budget should be, the maximum funding, requirements, that sort of thing. It's very general, it's very loose, it's very broad. If you're interested in applying for this solicitation, I would encourage you to speak with a program officer to get more information. And I think it's a really exciting time for this program. So please check it out, PD 18-1998. And don't worry, I'll tweet it, okay?
All right, thank you, Talitha. So moving on, we're on a bit of a timetable because our next speaker does have a flight to catch as soon as his talk is over. It's my privilege to introduce our next speaker, Mr. Charles Fidel. And in keeping with yesterday's theme of enunciating our own sense of underachievement, Mr. Fidel is the founder of two initiatives, the Center for Curricular Redesign and the Fundación Helvética Educación, in addition to being an author and a visiting scholar at the Harvard School of Graduate Education. So I won't keep you any further. It's my privilege to introduce Mr. Fidel. Charles? Thank you. Thank you.
Ready, set? Okay. Hi, everyone. I have the enviable task of competing with your digestion. Hopefully we'll be doing this on pleasant terms. And to get us all started, why not a bit of music? So, do you recognize the composer? Do you recognize the composer? Mozart, Bach. Okay. How about this one? Who else? Who? Mozart, Bach again? Angels, you said. Handel, sorry. Any more Bach takers? Well, that's okay. We don't have the music department involved here. How about this one? Scott Joplin, of course. Okay, now let's test your knowledge of painting. Who painted this? Rembrandt, thank you. So, yes and no. So this was painted by algorithms mimicking Rembrandt. The music you have heard was also composed by algorithms mimicking Bach. And experts have been fooled by these imitations. So this already starts encroaching on an area of human endeavors which we think is so especially human, which is creativity. Not quite so. A lot of incremental creativity can already be mimicked via algorithms. And that's all due because, as you know, we've had this enormous improvement over the past 25 years in terms of semiconductor capabilities. When I started my career in the semiconductor industry, these were phones. Now they allow you to receive a Starbucks coupon as you're walking by thanks to GPS geolocation. And the younger generation even doesn't use them as phones. They're still called smartphones. Similarly, though, neural nets have followed the same evolution. What we call now deep learning used to be called neural nets. When I started Neurodyne back in 1989 and we could only compute 3 layers of neurons, it died pretty quickly. Now at 50 layers of neurons, we can recognize faces, synthesize music, translate speech, and on and on and on. The world has changed dramatically. And even in the past few years, we have gone from cartoon to reality. So take a look at this Dilbert cartoon, and for those of you at the back of the room, you have him with his assistant saying, schedule a meeting with Dilbert and Alice for next Tuesday at 10. The little machine says, done. Never mind, my phone took care of it. And she looks all frazzled with big eyes, and he says, oh, awkward. And yet, we have AI agents who do this, like so-called Amy, or pick your choice of box, right? These things can do all sorts of scheduling and playing and on and on. This went from cartoon as a joke to reality in 6 years. And AI is now applied absolutely everywhere. Billions of dollars of investments going into the field, and a resurgence we haven't seen since the 80s. As a result, we're able to translate and interpret, whether it's faces or languages. We can also do analytical and synthetic tasks, whether it's e-discovery of legal documents, automatic trading, or even posting Olympic results automatically on press pages. This is already done. And of course, as I said, incremental creativity, but even some elements of innovation by analogy, where you can look at patents, find patterns in the tens of thousands of patents you have in your database, and innovate ahead of what humans could even think of. We can also use AI even today, at today's results, to come up with better diagnostics than doctors for heart attacks and strokes and autism and Alzheimer's and surgery procedures. It's a tie with humans back in 2017, by the way, it's not even today. It was already a tie for brain cancer diagnostics, ophthalmology, and skin cancer, but humans still win with general diagnostics. Why do you think that is the case? Why are we better than machines at general diagnostics? Say it louder. Too many variables, exactly. It's an unbounded problem. It's not a neatly bounded problem where you say, interpret that X-ray or interpret this slide. So, back in 2004, Roger Schenck, who is an interesting mixture of AI and educator, came up with this book called The Educated Mind, and he said an educated mind should be able to do all these things. So play with me for a second and tell me, where do we stop? What are machines capable of doing at this point or not? Can machines determine connections? Spot analogies? Predict outcomes? Learn from failure? Recover from failure? Seek explanations? Absorb newness? Yes, no, maybe? Handle exceptions? Deal with abstraction? Generalize reasonably? Be self-aware? All right, so we've seen this gray scale going from mostly yes to pretty much no. And the reality is, even in 2018, we're at a sort of level just about everywhere, minus pretty much the last one. Because it depends on how the data is formatted, it depends what kind of question we're asking, etc. So it's a sort of. And that makes an enormous difference, because it means we're functioning at the task level, not necessarily at the occupation level. Let me rephrase this differently. If you think of your job, is your job merely a series of discrete tasks, some of which can be automated, or is it also the glue, the scripts, if you want, between all these tasks? Right? It's just more than this. So if your job was to be very, very monotonic, say you drive from point A to point B and that's pretty much all you do 95% of your time, that is much more brittle than if your job is a succession of different tasks and you're having to juggle human elements among all of that. So let's talk about educators, right, as an occupation. Is it a low-skill or a high-skill task? We would hope it is a high-skill task. And is it personal or impersonally delivered? Personal. If it was impersonal and low-skill, it would be a video on YouTube, right? Khan Academy, whatever. If it's high-skill, highly personal touch, then that's what you're doing. So now you can rest a bit. You're less automatable than most other professions. Good to know. And you know, it's very fitting to be speaking of Moore's Law at a Noyce summit. There's something very deep about it. Yes, the law has continued unabated. It predates Moore and continues unabated. And with other types of chips or algorithms or computing architectures, we're not seeing a slowing down of the trend at this point. And it's slightly hyper-exponential, as you can see. It's an exponential with a slight curve in it. All this to say that I feel that we are in the situation of Jean-Marc Coté back in 1899, when he was asked to imagine year 2000 in a series of cartoons that were, by the way, published by Isaac Asimov in a lovely little book. And this is one of the many cartoons, and it shows what his vision of a robot was. Well, so think about the blinders of the time. At the time, there were no such things as small, cheap motors, and there certainly wasn't anything about electronics. So you had to imagine a maid pulling things, and mechanical engineering was the height of technology at the time, and well, that's what you could imagine. You would not have imagined Roomba. Simply not possible. And yet, I fear that we're all in this situation, trying to figure out, well, how can we imagine the unimaginable? Well, we can't. So what do we do to be prepared? So that's a question I'd like to pose to all of you, irrespective of how clumsy it is to try to get input from hundreds of people all at once. But what do you think we, because we are already impacted, and our children will need to be successful in a world of AI? What do you think? What do we need? Keeping on learning. Break apart black boxes. Lots of electricity. I'm an electrical engineer. I don't mind. What else? Sense of caution. Trust. Imagination. Thank you. Flexibility. Love. Even a STEM audience says that. Nice. What else? Relationship. Problem solving. Universal income. What? Ethics. Thank you. Sure. Willingness to fail. Tolerance of improvement. Intrusion. Okay. Using tools appropriately. Thank you. How about all of the above and more? Yeah. So if you just look at Bloom's taxonomy and look at various apps out there, you realize, wow, we have apps that address pretty much all the levels already, ranging from merely remembering, and these things remember too much, all the way up to inventing. I mentioned the invention machine earlier on, the patent thing, but you saw the painting fool. You say, okay, fine, but that's just the cognitive domain, Charles. How about the affective domain? Okay, fine. Well, here's the affective domain, right? So we have technologies that receive and respond, but we also have technologies that are valuing our emotions, you know, whether it's the inflection in our voice, or the heat map of our bodies, or analyzing all our tweets and coming up with a big 5 personality analysis of us. These technologies are all there. Okay, how about the psychomotor domain? Well, these are even easier, actually, right? So whether it's very, very non-intelligent bar scanners all the way up to whatever flying or self-driving contraption you want, is pretty much already here. So, what is the impact of all of this? Well, here are areas which, in my opinion, machines best humans. I'm going to let you read. Is this readable from the back of the room? And they have biases too. It's just that the algorithmic bias, I mean the writer of the algorithms and the data sets that are chosen introduce biases. So as you know, we cannot claim that these are unbiased decision-making apparatus. They're not. They're just reflecting the bias of the programming. However, once these things are accounted for, they don't have a sick family member to worry about or whatever. They can be much more monotonic in their decision making. Case in point, would you like to go in front of a court before lunch or after lunch? What do you think the better time is? Depends, exactly. Exactly. So yes, it turns out that sentencing is harsher after lunch than it is before lunch. People get cranky in the afternoon. An automatic sentencer would not, and would be dispassionate about all sorts of other parameters in as much as it's programmed properly. So yeah, humans are very complex. You know from the work of Kahneman and plenty of others that we have all these systems, slow and fast systems, interfering with each other, making decisions fast but being slow to train versus making decisions slowly but being fast to train by comparison. We are amazingly complex, and if you look at even in the hippocampus, these are all the types of cells that we have in the hippocampus alone, and look at the complexity of just the cell types in one small region. Never mind, of course, the entire connectome, right? So we are incredibly complicated, and so far, for the time being, I think we're going to be better at the following. I'd love you to get your opinions too. Fair enough? So, going back to this question, if we are all facing an uncertain future, what is the best hedge strategy we could think of? At least in our opinion, it is that of versatility, right? the Swiss Army knife analogy. I have no idea what the future is throwing my way, but I better be prepared, and I have a lot of tools in my toolkit. I may not be the sharpest knife, specifically, but that can be refined, that can be sharpened. You have a solid base from which you can then improve. In essence, it is the T-shaped parcel that our friend Jim Sporter, IBM, has been talking about for a long time, right? Broad knowledge and deep knowledge, not one or the other. And yes, it looks like a Renaissance human in the end. Forgive the old white man thing analogy here. Nevertheless, Leonardo da Vinci is the person we associate the most with a Renaissance person. So that's, in a sense, what we're trying to have all of us become. Whatever life throws at us, we can react appropriately because we're equipped. Part of that equipment is to be computationally capable, algorithmically capable. So I'll let you read this. Fair enough. I mean, certainly in finance, Goldman Sachs has gone from 600 traders to 2. And they have ramped up the computer scientists to 200. So guess what happens? And so we are forced to rethink of an education much more broadly, right? Which is what an education has always been. It's just that we have never expressed these other dimensions with the same alacrity and acuity that we need nowadays. So yes, of course, knowledge, but we need to modernize that, and we're going to talk about that in a moment. But also the skills or how we apply that knowledge. So creativity, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, the 4 C's. But above and beyond that, it's also how we behave and engage in the world. So it is, in this case, we have concatenated down 250 words that people use in this domain down to these essential 6: mindfulness, curiosity, courage, resilience, ethics, and leadership. But then we're also highlighting this 4th dimension. It's truly critical. Think about it for a second. The ability to reflect and adapt, your meta-learning abilities. If you don't know what life is going to throw at you, your ability to learn how to learn is completely essential, right? So training that metacognition, training that growth mindset are absolutely necessary. And if you subsume this dimension under something else, it simply doesn't happen. You have to make it visible, you have to spend time on it. Okay. Now let's start looking into knowledge. Well, before algorithms, we were all prisoners of what we could have in our memories or in our books. And the Greeks bemoaned the appearance of alphabet because now you didn't have to learn the Iliad by heart anymore. So yes, our memories shrunk in their capabilities, but we were able to communicate a lot more information. And now we have the same situation with search, where the need for amassing information is less intense than it used to be. And with AI algorithms and so on, we'll also be in a situation where the understanding part can also be helped out. Well, what were forever the goals of an education? Expertise and transfer. Yes, I want to be able to use what I've learned in my science class about the scientific method outside of science. I want to be able to understand my logic, what a fact actually truly means, and not be stuck into thinking facts equals only what I've learned in science, but facts are used in all of life. And so there's an affordance here. Rather than bemoaning the fact, like the Greeks, that we're going to be putting less emphasis on raw knowledge, how about we spend a lot more time on what were supposed to be the goals of an education? Right? Expertise and transfer. It frees us if we know how to repartition our time properly. So, what it means is we're going to have to pay much more attention to what is actually essential in the content we teach and not overload it, so that we do have time to pay attention to the core concepts, the ones that stay with us for life. So I learned the concept of proof in mathematics. A, it transfers, and B, I remember it for life. Or I learned the concept of, say, rate of change out of derivatives. But I'll need to remember how to compute a derivative for most jobs. I need to know how to understand the concept of rate of change. And so if something changes rapidly on me, say an exponential, I get alarmed. Zika, Ebola, carbon dioxide. Oh, I better be careful here. Those are concepts that everyone should remember for life. This means we're going to be modernizing some of these disciplines, right? There's also the type of knowledge that matters. So how about we make these hard choices? Less trigonometry, algebra, calculus. And note that I said less. I didn't say no. I said less. Periodicity, yes. Trigonometric functions, not so hot. I don't need to be a land surveyor or a woodworker nowadays, right? However, branches of mathematics that are so important that we have neglected and we don't have time for because all the time is sucked up by the traditional aspects of mathematics, like stats and probabilities and discrete math and algorithmics and so on. So you say, Charles, come on, how revolutionary you are with these things. Okay, well, let me quote an NSF report. Sounds eerily similar. So, do you think this report was written in the past 10 years? Raise your hands. 20 years? 30 years? 40 years? The 40 years have it. Yes, wow. And here you are looking at me like, oh my God, how revolutionary, Charles, you are. Not quite. It's just that we change so slowly. So, yes, we change slowly because it's really hard to make choices, right? It's a little bit like our personal budgets or even this country's budget, right? Every line item can be justified in isolation. Sure, we need square roots by hand, whatever, inventing something here. But all together, that breaks the bank. So we have to make those hard choices. So that there is time to actually teach the T and E part of STEM. We love to call it STEM, but really M and S, by and large. And on the fringes, you all try really, really, really hard to teach technology and engineering with very little time and very little materials. So what if we took the time? What if we carved out the time in the core, not after school, not just, for those who can, for everybody, to teach computer science, electrical engineering, bioengineering, and so on? Perfectly doable, if we took the time. There are also a lot of other things that matter for a modern economy: social sciences, media, entrepreneurship, mental wellness, etc. And if we are to respond to these big ideas of the NSF, the number of them are directly related to these modern disciplines that should be taught. And furthermore, it's a question of matrixing your disciplines with the competencies. In other words, how do we teach critical thinking in the context of math or sciences or whatever? How do we make sure it actually sticks in a deliberate, comprehensive, systematic, and demonstrable way? I hammer on these 4 words because everyone will come and say, yeah, but I do this in my class. Say, okay, do you do this by happenstance? You do this all the time? You do this with a plan, a systematic plan, and you have results you can show me? If you do, please come and talk to me. Even if you have ideas, please come and talk to me. But this is really the frontier, right? Not just modernizing the knowledge side, but making sure that we learn how to reason and think critically, etc., in the context of these disciplines in a transferable way. And so, yes, it is this difficult game of Jenga tower. What do we remove without collapsing the edifice? How can we remove the things that are not load-bearing so that we do free up time and space for a lot of other things we want to do? So what do we remove from the traditional branches and disciplines to make that time available? And that means a line item by line item re-examination of what we're doing. There's no magic big pile that says cut here, everything can go. Even my not so beloved trigonometry, I did say periodicity matters a great bit. So we're keeping this. And it's hard because you have to fight biases, groupthink, and politics, and all sorts of things. But each one of you, in your classrooms, you have that latitude to make those instantaneous choices. You know, do I really need to teach this much cell biology for them to be able to do a gene sequence? Just ask yourself, do they really need to know all these things? How much is just us going on inertia versus what's truly needed? So, to conclude, we're going to end up, quite honestly, in a more of a symbiosis than we realize. Not to say it's not going to be complicated. There's going to be, of course, at the task level and occupation level, a sort of form of symbiosis, but I think we're also going to start seeing more and more developments that will help us by removing the tedium from some of our jobs. If we had automated grading of something that's rather trivial, why wouldn't we use it so that we actually spend our time comprehending what the student has done and helping them along the way? There may be all sorts of ways that this will play out, and you know, I also want to make sure that it is not used as a panacea, the same way that we threw computers at things thinking, well, computers will take care of the learning. No, not quite. Same thing here. We can't just throw algorithms at the problem and say, well, the algorithms will figure it out. No, we figure it out. So, powerful tools that we'll have to master, and you know, I can't wait to hear your ideas about how you're going to do so in your own profession and in your daily activities. So, with that, I thank you very much. And one more thing, if you wish to dig deeper, you can download this book. Here's the bit.ly right there, anytime you care. Okay.